Your parents are still running your life, even if you're convinced they're not, even if you haven't spoken to them in years. Here's how you know. When you act in a way that doesn't match the moment, when something comes out of your mouth and you think, where did that come from? That's not personality. Those are patterns that were carved into you before you were old enough to even know they were there. My name is Ryan Suave. I'm a therapist with over 10,000 hours of clinical service, and I've spent my career sitting with people who are sure they're running their own lives until the pressure shows up. And then their parents come out of their mouths anyway. And here's what surprises most people. The ones who've built the exact opposite aren't free either. The guy who swore he would never be his father and has done everything differently, he's still being run by the same thing, just in reverse. Because we tend to either adopt or rebel against the patterns of our parents or caregivers, but both are the same machine. One flows forward, the other flows in reverse, and both are reactions, neither are a choice. Until you can see what was carved into you, you'll continue to call it personality. I'm gonna show you how to know exactly what was carved and how you can get out of it. This is not about blaming your parents or caregivers. It's simply about understanding how we were shaped. And in order to do that, I'm gonna use a metaphor. It's not a perfect metaphor. I'm not a geologist, but just follow me. If we have a river, it's a glacial river that flows down a mountain from a melting glacier at the top. In its history, this glacier would have moved very slowly up this mountain, maybe taking thousands, if not millions of years, and the pressure of that glacier would shape the mountain underneath it. And when that glacier arrived at the top and eventually began to melt, the river would form by the water flowing through the shaping that the glacier made in the mountain. This carving by the glacier would be the formative years of this mountain and therefore the riverbed. And how it was shaped in those formative years informs how the river flows down the mountain. It will inform how wide it is, how deep it is, how shallow it is, how fast the water moves. Once the size, shape, width, and speed of the river is determined, that will then inform how that river relates to everything around it. How a fish swims in it, how a bird sits on it, how a person navigates it, how a civilization is built next to it, how a bridge goes over it. It informs how it relates to life outside of the river. Now, the water flowing down the mountain over time can also shape the riverbed, but not in the same way or with the same impact that occurred with the weight of the glacier in its formative years. And we're very similar to that. We call them our formative years for a reason. That's when we're forming. Our brains are forming, ego development is forming, we're forming how we relate to ourselves, to others, and the world. Our brains are full of plasticity, and we're extremely impacted not only by how our parents and caregivers act, but by the experiences that we have in those years. It's very simple. Continuing the river metaphor, we can have an impact on that river. You know, we could determine that we're going to build a civilization next to it, so we dam the river. And when we dam the river, it forms a lake, and then we're able to build a civilization around it. And the river now is flowing differently than it did by the shaping of its formative years. However, if there was enough stress and that dam were to break, the river is going to flow pretty much in its original form. That happens to us. We can do a lot of work to override our patterns, to begin to behave differently in life. And yet, under stress and under enough pressure, we'll revert to the patterns that were shaped that allowed us to not only live, but survive our formative years. And these patterns arrive often unconsciously and automatically. And we're not here to get rid of them completely, but we want to become aware of them and understand what we're thrown to, what under pressure we will return to. And also to just simply understand what are these unconscious and automatic patterns that might be having some sort of control over us, or we find that we have the need to be a certain way, the need to maybe drive or to retreat. What are the things that we see about ourselves in reaction, and how were they shaped by these early years? Again, not to blame anybody, but to understand how life automatically and unconsciously will flow through us, especially under pressure or stress. And it's important to note that most of the time, this wasn't something that your parents or caregivers were saying, this is how we want to carve the riverbed of your life. They had their own carving and the carving before them. We are downstream of generations before us. And people think about our things that are passed down in our genetics and our DNA, are the way that we look, the type of body we have, the illnesses that we might be susceptible to, the way that our body works in general. But there's more than that. We don't just inherit what's in our DNA. We inherit behaviors and patterns. There's actually a branch of science for this called epigenetics. What I see is the debate over nature versus nurture, the DNA versus how we were raised in the environment we were in. As we understand more and more about human behavior, that gap closes. Many years ago, I was working in China and I was walking through an airport and I smelled something that was one of the worst smells I'd ever experienced. It had the hair on the back of my neck stand up and I couldn't figure out what it was. And I looked over and there was a family sitting there, parents and two little kids, and they were eating something. And I walked over by them, still smelling this, and they were eating this like dried fish out of a bag, and it looked like a bag of candy, and they were enjoying it. And they really seemed to love it. So this thing that was disgusting to me was loved by these children and their parents. And it really hit me. Taste is informed by the environments that we're in. And we see this all over the world. Certain cultures eat certain ways. And that doesn't mean that we don't try other cultures' foods or anything like that. But where we grow up and how we're fed informs often what are the foods that we like. And if taste can be informed, why wouldn't other behavior patterns? Ultimately, our behaviors are driven by the beliefs that we hold about ourselves, the world, and our place in it. And we absorb that in these formative years from the people that we're around. But it doesn't always work that they like this food, so we're gonna like this food. Sometimes it's the opposite. It's not just that they think this way or believe this way, and so we're gonna think or believe this way. We might be doing the exact opposite as we grow up and become adults. And that's because we tend to either adopt or rebel against the pattern of our parents. We'll either kind of do the same thing or potentially do the opposite. But here's the thing, in either way, adopt might look like I withdraw because they withdrew. I work hard because they work hard. I save money because they saved money. Rebel could be they yelled, so I get quiet. They withdrew, so I'm the life of the party. They worked all the time, so I do everything possible to avoid it. It's easy to see that when we adopt certain patterns, specifically about the ones that aren't working for us in our lives, that we're being controlled by the pattern of our parents. However, when we do the exact opposite, we're also being controlled by the patterns of our parents. Because it's like when I adopt it, I need to do it because that's what I learned. And when I rebel against it, I need to do the exact opposite because that's what I learned. A friend of mine always tells this story, and she says there's these two twins and they're raised in the same family. They're identical twins and the same parents at the same time, and their dad is a terrible alcoholic and ultimately drinks himself to death. And as the boys grow up and become men, one becomes a terrible alcoholic and the other a complete teetotaler and doesn't drink at all. And so the boys are interviewed and they ask the now man who drinks, and they say, "Why do you drink so much?" And he says, "Look at my father. Did you see what he did? How could I not drink?" And then they ask the man who doesn't drink, the complete teetotaler, and they say, "Why don't you drink?" And he says, "Look at my father. Look what he did. How could I ever pick up a drink?" This is an example of adopting or rebelling. Now, in this case, the adopting may have been more harmful than the rebelling, but it can work the other way. This could be a dad who never drank and talked to his boys and made it seem evil, and one followed along and the other became a terrible alcoholic. So even when people think rebellion in this way is freedom, it's really not. What many people think is this rebellion looks like character, like growth, like you've built your own life. But if you look underneath it, especially under pressure and stress, you might find that you're not actually completely in control. And people do figure out workarounds. They build bridges over this river of life, of the patterns of their parents. They dam parts of it up. They dig channels that route the water somewhere else for a while. That's what even happens a lot in therapy and personal development. People develop a new language, they develop some new tools and practices. And none of these things are bad. The problem is when tools, practices, therapy, new language is being used to just divert the water for a period of time without really understanding what the shaping of the river is. Because that diversion can help the person navigate life or have life flow through them in a different way while those diversions are in place. But when the dam breaks, it all goes to hell in a handbasket. Sitting there going, how am I acting and behaving in this way again? I developed these new strategies. And again, strategies are important, but more important than having strategies is understanding what the shaping of that riverbed is, so that you can know when pressure does come, when the dam does break, how is the river going to flow, and what can I do with it then? How can I flow with that river rather than swimming up against it or being swept away by it? The good news is we don't have to be controlled by this stuff forever. When we can become aware of it and really understand what we're thrown to, what we're going to revert to under pressure, we can be aware of it. We're not going to be shocked by it when it comes. And when we can begin to not only watch for it, but we can almost predict it and understand that in these moments, life is going to want to flow through me in this way. And if I'm trying to do anything else, it's going to be very uncomfortable. So the work isn't to go blow up the mountain and reshape the river completely. It's to be able to build the capacity to experience discomfort and to allow the challenging times to move through us, to build emotional resilience and distress tolerance, to be able to learn how to feel bad, to be in the middle of this river of life, flowing and scary and not having to be swept away. And over time, we can potentially reshape the riverbed, but also be able to just understand it and navigate it in a much more authentic way. You know, that it's not controlling us, that we become in charge of it. So how do we do that? Number first, awareness. Understand how life flows through us. Understand where it's going to be moving fast or slow, where there might be rough waters, where there might be rapids, to be able to just understand that about ourselves. Not that it's fixed like that forever, but to know I'm not exactly like my neighbor or one of my friends that reacts to life in a certain way under stress, that this is where my hangups are. And to do this without judgment, to do it neutrally. Because without awareness, we can't change anything. If we have awareness, not only can we catch it once it's happening, but we can begin to catch it earlier, before the dam completely breaks. And as we practice this and we can recognize it, we can sit with the discomfort and then make a new choice, not let the water or the current just make a choice for us. We can make the choice that's going to move us in the direction that we want to go rather than just being pushed downstream. And as we do this over time, through repetition, it becomes easier. This helps us to build that capacity and even begins to reshape parts of the river. That capacity for our nervous system to be able to hold discomfort, for us to be able to override that survival response when survival response is not called for, can make all of the difference. Where Viktor Frankl said that there's that space between stimulus and response, and in that space is our ability to choose, and in that choice lies our power and our freedom to be able to build the capacity to be in the middle of discomfort, of fear, of anxiety, of shame, of other uncomfortable emotions, and be able to look at all options and make a choice rather than go into automatic reaction. When we have that awareness, that repetition, over time, it builds this capacity. And in that capacity, we can really thrive. Everything I just walked you through is still the surface, the riverbed, the parents, the adopt rebel trap, the workarounds that break under pressure, all of it. There's another level deeper. Carl Jung called it the shadow. And he said, it's the only real danger that exists. Not your mother, not your father, the part of you that doesn't even know it's there. It's the part of you that explodes when you swore you wouldn't. It's the part of you that goes silent when a loved one asks for connection and presence. The part of you that wants something that it won't even let you name. It's running on code written when you were 5, 6, or 7 years old. And it's deciding right now how you handle the next thing that goes wrong. Until you see it, it keeps deciding. In the next video, I'll show you what the shadow actually is, why it's been pulling the strings the whole time, and how you can stop being run by it. If anything in this video struck a chord, please like, comment, share with somebody. I'm grateful you watched, and I'll see you in the next one.